particular, I guess I'm off now.
No, you're on.
You're on.
I'm sorry. I think it's worth emphasizing that religious terrorism in particular has no constraint on mass casualties. This is quite strikingly different. Moreover, some 40% of the terrorist acts in recent years have had no responsibility claims. We believe that's because of the frequency, the increasing frequency of religious extremist terrorism, killing in the name of God. One doesn't need to have a headline in the New York Times or a television story on Channel 9. God knows, after all.
Would you pinpoint, I mean, would you say that there's been a massive breakdown in American intelligence, or is this just something we're going to have to expect for the next few years, or the next several years for that matter?
I wouldn't say it's a massive breakdown in American intelligence, as incredible as that may sound. This is such a difficult target. Having said that, I am struck. Hearings were starting today on defending and protecting America against weapons of mass destruction terrorism, referring to chemical, biological, nuclear terrorism. The major terrorist acts that have been so devastating, the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, the earlier attack on the Trade Center buildings, these attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center were all conventional terrorism.
Right.
And we need to really pour significant more resources into our intelligence services and be protecting against conventional terrorism. Thus by, for example, hardening our embassies overseas.
I'm not making an argument for or against a missile defense shield, but it wouldn't have had any impact on this.
That's absolutely correct.
Although, but they're talking about billions and billions going into that.
And money is fungible, after all, and yet there are cries unheeded for improving our security at embassies abroad.
All right, Dr. Gerald Post, we thank you very much.
And we're sorry we misidentified you at the top.
Well, I should hope so.
Okay. Sorry about that. He is indeed. He's been with us. He was with us earlier today. Dave Statter's been at the Pentagon all day today since the Pentagon was hit, and he has new information for us. Dave?
We're looking at the Pentagon, still burning, still fire under the roof there. Fire at either end, basically. We saw erupt just a short time ago. The firefighting operations continue. One of the largest firefighting operations in Washington, D.C. history, with fire companies joining Arlington from the military, from surrounding counties as far away as Loudoun and Montgomery County. Montgomery County Search and Rescue on the team, their urban search and rescue. Fairfax County here still don't have a counting for you of how many people may have perished in this building and on the airplane. As we talk about this here, with me is Harold Schaitberger again. He's the president, general president of the International Association of Firefighters. You have a story to tell us about the first firefighters were here with Fort Myer Fire Department, who are stationed right there.
That's right. We have a station right at the Pentagon for the heliport. The two firefighters right after the towers were hit, I'm sure were put on a high level of alert. They were outside and actually reported to their dispatch on an open mic that they saw the commercial airliner coming toward the Pentagon and witnessed with an open mic the airliner hit the Pentagon.
Right next to them?
Right next to them, probably 40 yards to the right. They are in the hospital now with injuries and burns, but again, a horrific incident.
Now, we talked to you at the top of the hour, and you gave us some information, some concrete information from talking to your chapter in New York. You've been talking to the sources there, and there's now some confirmation on the wire of 200 trapped firefighters in the World Trade Center rubble in New York. You presume that many of them are dead.
Well, those that are in the rubble, it will be an absolute miracle for anybody to survive. I was in Oklahoma City and watched the devastation of that. We are talking about 2 mountains of concrete that have literally come down in the street. We know we have just scores and scores of firefighters that, very tragically, that we're going to lose, and we were not going to know that number till tomorrow morning sometime.
But also the number of people in those buildings, your information that we're talking about a death toll, well, nobody will give us a concrete figure. What are you hearing?
Well, and I don't want to be the one to try to do a concrete figure, but I am hearing that we may reach or exceed 10,000 victims.
You're hearing that from the president, general president of the International Association of Firefighters. Basically, the rescuers show up there, they're going into mode to rescue people, and all of a sudden it comes down on top of them.
They're inside that building. They're doing their job. They're working the stairways. They're working to evacuate the citizens. They're working to advance to put themselves in a position to attack the fire. They're doing search and rescue. They're doing their job like they're trained to do, and that building comes down.
So maybe 200 firefighters lost, and his best information from talking to firefighters in New York that the death toll there could be 10,000 or more. Again, that is not confirmed at this point, but it's the only person right now who's really to put an approximate number of what's going on in New York, and it seems to jibe the figure with the number that the wires are reporting that are trapped in the rubble of firefighters alone in New York. And again, here at the Pentagon, we don't have any good information for you about number of dead here.
Dave, thanks a lot.
Now, we also know that a 47-story adjacent office building, that is adjacent to the Twin Towers in New York, has also collapsed. But it's our understanding that that building had been evacuated when the collapse occurred.
This was known as Building 7 of the World Trade Center, and that is fresh video you're looking at of that coming down.
Now, again, they were able to get everybody out of that building before it collapsed. So I don't know whether it was accomplished by demolition experts or whether it just happened as a consequence of what occurred earlier today.
Gordon, Dr. Post just was talking about security at the U.S. embassies, and now the wires are reporting that the U.S. State Department is urging embassies to, in fact, shut down. And let me just tell you that several U.S. embassies in the Middle East have decided to close indefinitely. The American embassy in Japan has opted not to open tomorrow. The U.S. Embassy in Venezuela has shut down at least through Wednesday, and in Italy, the U.S. Embassy there has warned American tourists to be vigilant and also take appropriate action to increase their security and reduce their vulnerability.
Now, downtown at this hour, 5:39, 5:40 on a Tuesday, would be gridlocked. People trying to get out of there. Let's see what it looks like right now. Here's Bruce Johnson.
Gordon, there's no gridlock here. The confidence, the strut of the nation's capital is long gone. As a matter of fact, the people who live and work here know that while the terrorists struck the World Trade Center, they struck the Pentagon, they probably could have hit any building in this town. Let's take a look at what we found today.
Group three. Everybody here? Colton, you work with me?
Yeah, I don't know. Where you want me at?
Put your shirt on, have your stuff ready to go.
A state of emergency in the nation's capital. An E-alert for the fire and ambulance department.
All the units and stuff are ready to go.
Elsewhere, downtown Washington was being evacuated. With all airports closed, rental car companies could not keep up with the demand.
We're from Oklahoma City, the two of us, and we had friends in the Oklahoma City bombing that were killed. And so to hear that today,
everywhere, people felt stunned and violated by today's terrorist attacks. You feel less safe right now?
Definitely, yes.
I didn't think this thing would really happen, but I'm just shocked. I'm in a state of shock.
All federal employees were sent home. At Union Station, all of the activity was on the outside as all the trains had stopped running.
They didn't tell us nothing. They wouldn't let us even near the doors. They said just get away from the building, come over here and sit down.
By midday, much of downtown had been turned into a ghost town. All federal buildings had been closed off to the public. The president had been kept out of the White House and out of Washington.
Actually kind of glad he's not here, amongst all this. I think communication is going to be fine.
Your thoughts?
It's a little surprising, but, this is just such a crisis that we've never experienced before. They don't know what to do, so...
Of course, the latest up-to-date word is that the president is now en route back to Washington. Over my shoulder back here, don't know if you can see it, but for the first time, we see some presence of the National Guard on the streets of the nation's capital. Normally, when this happens, if it isn't for a parade, it's something serious. Also want to point out, a lot of people are asking right now what happens tomorrow. Some people want to get back to work as soon as possible. They're waiting to hear from OMB, from the D.C. government, on whether or not these public buildings and public workers will be allowed back on the job. Just want to point out also, and this had to have come from a firefighter, D.C. firefighter approached me a little while ago, and he says, the terrorists picked September 11th, 9/11, to strike in New York and Washington. Gavir, Gordon, back to you.
Bruce, Mayor Williams says all bridges into and out of D.C. are open, as are all streets except some right near the White House.
Okay, Gordon, and all of these roads, for the most part, downtown are open. You can get around, but for some reason, it's probably voluntary, people are staying away from this area, and probably with good reason.
Thank you, Bruce Johnson. We told you earlier that the wife of U.S. Solicitor General Theodore Olson was aboard the jetliner that crashed into the Pentagon. What did you say?
Barbara Olson.
Barbara Olson, yes, I was going to mention her name. We are now getting word from the Associated Press that she apparently called her husband from the plane as the plane was being hijacked. She twice called her husband, according to the Associated Press, and described to him details of the hijacking, including that the attackers were using knife-like instruments. This is according to law enforcement officials. They wouldn't say very much more about the conversations. The Associated Press talked to Ted Olson, who told them she was on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. She called from the plane while it was being hijacked. I wish it wasn't so, but it is.
Ted Olson was, of course, who argued the case for the Bush campaign before the Supreme Court, you know, over the Florida election controversy. And Barbara Olson, who is a Washington personality and attorney in her own right and is often seen on Larry King Live and other broadcasts.
She was on American Airlines Flight 77, which was leaving Dulles and headed to Los Angeles.
And that's the one that went into the Pentagon?
Yes.
Area hospitals are busy tonight handling volunteers who have come to donate blood. Frank Herzog visited the facility at Inova Alexandria Hospital.
Within a half hour of the Pentagon attack, a large lobby area in this hospital filled with volunteers and potential blood donors.
We are overwhelmed with donors. It's just a wonderful response. People are concerned and are looking to help in any way that they can.
The line of donors stretched down a long hallway. One couple had waited for more than 3 hours.
Actually, I tried to get involved with setting up of an aid station with a friend of mine who's a paramedic, but they had too many people to handle. So trying to find something else that I can do, just some other way to contribute.
The faces we saw reflected two emotions: stunned disbelief and steely resolve.
Because I have B negative blood. It's the most rare blood, and I like to donate whenever I can.
Unbelievable. Coordinated attack. Unbelievable.
It's staggering. We were watching some footage in there, and it's unbelievable.
We will be open until midnight here at Alexandria Hospital. We'll be open here at Alexandria from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. tomorrow. We'll be open at the Mount Vernon Center from 10 a.m. until 7 p.m. tomorrow. We'll be open at Mount Vernon at least until 10 o'clock tonight.
If you've never given blood before, it's really a piece of cake. The hardest part is the paperwork. If you'd like to find a blood bank in your area and don't know of one, you can call this number, 1-866-BLOOD-SAVES. They need your help. From Inova Hospital in Alexandria, I'm Frank Herzog for 9 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much.
There were two planes that hit the World Trade Center today, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175.
And we have exclusive videotape from CBS News of that second plane crash. Oh, there it is. Oh, my God.
Oh, my God! Jesus fucking Christ!
That's...
it's unreal.
It's just...
oh, my God!
A ball of flame envelops the second of the World Trade Center. Untold death and destruction.
As you can imagine, a chaotic scene there this morning. We had a tough time today in our area as people tried to leave downtown Washington, D.C.
This is the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. People leaving New York City after that by foot.
Many people walking, yes.
One of the most, Brooklyn Bridge, of course, one of the most famous bridges in the world. And these folks are in a hurry, and as you say, with good reason. A Navy official in Norfolk, Virginia, says the country hasn't seen an attack like today's, of course, since Pearl Harbor, and the Navy has sent the Kennedy and other aircraft carriers and carrier destroyers and into the Washington and New York areas.
President George Bush is vowing revenge and promising to, what he says, hunt down and punish those responsible for the terrorist strikes. Greg Stoddard has more on that now from our newsroom. Greg?
Well, the president says the full resources of the federal government will be used to protect the American people. And tonight, he's on his way back to Washington. Mr. Bush was in Florida when the first attack occurred, and later, after landing in Louisiana, he had tough words for those responsible.
Make no mistake. The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
The president with strong words tonight for those responsible for the Trade Center and Pentagon attacks. Mr. Bush telling the world the United States has taken every security precaution.
Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status.
Mr. Bush in constant contact with the vice president and the rest of his cabinet, and the administration making it clear the U.S. will not be intimidated.
Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively.
And Karen Hughes says the vice president is in a secure place inside the White House. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon. The entire cabinet in communication with the president. Gavir, Gordon?
Greg Stoddard in our newsroom. Thank you. Our Verge Jock is at Connecticut and K. All right, we're not going to him just yet.
The city's getting help tonight from the D.C. National Guard. Shortly after the attacks this morning, the call went out for members to report to the Armory, and we'll have more on that later.
Now let's go to Verge, who is ready for us at Connecticut and K. Verge?
Gavir, just about 5:30, we saw a parade of military armored personnel vehicles going down K Street westward direction. We're not sure exactly where they're headed to, but a couple of dozen of them. Streets were blocked off. Earlier today, some other strange, unusual sights on the streets of Washington. The closing of federal buildings and a mass exodus from downtown Washington turned the streets into a big parking lot. Concerned pedestrians stopped to learn the latest about the terrorist attacks.
Kind of scary, actually. It's really scary. The morning started very well, but it's like I'm not looking forward to go back.
Catherine Axelson is talking about going back home to New York City. She visited the U.S. Capitol before it was evacuated.
I'm still in shock. I'm not quite can imagine what happened. So it's like I'm still in shock because I can't see it from my eyes now. I saw something on the screen over there, and it's just like, wow, is that really happening?
Unfortunately, it was happening. Washington was under siege.
I know. As many other Americans, are just in a state of shock right now. And as we begin to think, to deal with all the grief and the loss here is just terrible for our nation. And how
Of course, government workers in federal buildings were evacuated a long time ago. If you take a look over my shoulder, you can see not too much of a rush hour in downtown Washington tonight. Gavir and Gordon, back to you.
Verge Jock, thanks a lot. Now to the story about the D.C. National Guard. The city is getting help from them. Our Stacey Cohan is covering that angle for us, and she's in our newsroom now. Stacey?
Well, Gavir, you know the National Guard's history is based on the Minutemen of the Revolutionary War. It's their job to serve at a moment's notice. And across our area, men and women dropped everything today to come to the aid of a city under attack. The D.C. Air National Guard F-16s fly over Washington with orders to turn away aircraft from the city, and if that doesn't work, to shoot them down. Across the city, hundreds of National Guard members report for duty at the D.C. Armory.
I was in class, so I didn't know what was going on. I got a call on my cell phone later on that break, and they told me that I need to get in.
So far, the D.C. National Guard is calling in the 372nd Military Police Battalion and all subordinate units, but more could follow.
The interesting thing is we've had many people just show up before the call went out. It's unbelievable. A lot of people just have been calling or just showing up.
The D.C. National Guard stands ready to back up any and all police departments in the district as the state of emergency here continues.
Well, we're used to it. He used to be active duty, so he was deployed all the time. We're used to it. But, of course, I don't want to see him go, but duty calls.
Now, there are approximately 3,000 members in the D.C. National Guard. Not all of them have been called to duty as we speak. Now, the National Guard was last deployed in the city to help with inauguration activities, and they were planning to assist later this month during the World Bank IMF meetings. They tell me they are ready to go, the full contingent, as soon as they're called. Back to you.
Stacey Cohan in our newsroom. Thanks a lot.
We understand that President Bush is planning to address the nation tonight. The president is on his way back to Washington. He was spirited from Florida to Louisiana to Nebraska earlier today after the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Earlier, the president said the resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we'll show the world that we will pass this test. And by teleconference, he joined a meeting of his National Security Council in Washington. And for a while there, with the White House and Camp David under threat of attack, the president's whereabouts were being kept secret.
And there are at least a couple of high-level government officials who are saying that they believe that Osama bin Laden and his organization is behind.
And Jack Kelly of USA Today, who was, of course, in Jerusalem when that pizza parlor was attacked by a suicide bomber, said he doesn't have any doubts about it being Osama bin Laden being up to this task, being capable of this task. That is not to say that he is the one responsible, but that's the name being bandied about, as it always is when something of this nature happens.
But again, we talked with Hussein Ibish, who is with the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and he cautioned everyone not to jump to conclusions. He said, remember after the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, everybody was quick to blame this on an Arab person, maybe an Arab American. It ended up being a domestic terrorism. So he was cautioning everyone to just wait and see.
Let's go. We have some videotape of people's response, people who were eyewitnesses or who were in the vicinity of the Pentagon attack earlier this morning. Let's go to that.
I recognized that the plane was coming in low, and I started watching it. Of course, I was listening to the radio, and I just heard the president's address about the attack in New York, and I thought it looked funny, but I didn't put two and two together, and then it sheared off the top of that pole over there, slammed into another pole, and went right into the building. There was a massive explosion and absolute chaos afterwards, and you could hear people screaming, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." It was unbelievable.
I'm thinking this is a travesty beyond belief. I know we need our money for this defense budget now. This is outrageous.
I'm worried about my mother. She was on that same wing, and I can't find her. I call my dad. I don't know where she is, and I can't get near anything. I can't get near my purse. Can't get near my car. Can't get near anything. So right now, I'm just trying to hold on.
We heard a loud bang, the ceiling, everything shook, the ceiling started to fall in, and we just grabbed our stuff and ran out. There's generators and things. We just thought something, there was malfunction, something exploded. That's nothing of this.
When we were in the conference room, we thought a truck had hit the building. So we knew it was a bomb because it was like 3 loud explosions, so we didn't know exactly what it was. We were just running and trying to get out of there. I mean, everything, ceiling tiles were falling in, and what was going through my mind is when I was out there was to make sure that we were all getting out of the building okay. That's all we were just, because we didn't know what to do. We panicked. We couldn't breathe because all the fumes, all the gasoline fumes was hurting us, and we got out.
The first speaker there was Mike Walter of USA Today. We've seen him on our air many times before. And David Beardsley, who writes for us and who lives over near Fort Myer, not far from there, said his whole house shook.
He actually felt it.
Yeah, and the cats scattered, he said.
I mean, it has been an incredible day. It really has. It's just, and I've used the word surreal before, but as we watch the events that unfolded, who would have imagined it? Who would have imagined it?
Well, this is, once again, this is New York City, the World Trade Center, a third building, actually, Building 7. A 47-story building just collapsed earlier today, but they were able to get people out of that building, of course, because they were worried about the structural integrity of the building, and they were right, it did collapse. So that's 3, the 2 towers, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, and Building 7, a 47-story building.
And Dave Statter just spoke with someone who's putting a figure of casualties in New York at 10,000.
Well, we don't know for sure, but we know that there were, what?
At least 10,000.
Well, we don't know for sure, but we know that, thousands of people were in the building when it was hit. And we know that there were about 24,000 employees in the Pentagon. We know that 36 people were treated at the hospital. In a sense, that's not good news, because you would have hoped for more injuries.
This all began just before 9 o'clock this morning when a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. Shortly, about 18 minutes after that, a second plane crashed into the World Trade Center. And then suddenly reports that right here in our backyard in Washington, D.C., that a plane had hit very close to the Pentagon
About 9:38 this morning, and Ted Olson, the Solicitor General of the United States, confirms that his wife Barbara was on board that aircraft that did hit the Pentagon. She called him from her cell phone to report that there were hijackers on board the plane.
And according to the Associated Press, she apparently told Mr. Olson about knife-wielding hijackers on board, and there's not much more coming out of there, but she apparently is one of the victims on board American Airlines.
Barbara Olson, the author of a book about Hillary Clinton, to identify her.
This has indeed been a day that a lot of us are going to remember for many years to come. Many have compared it to what happened at Pearl Harbor, where 2,400 people lost their lives. People will say, where were you today?
CNN is reporting explosions in Afghanistan right now. Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska says America is forever changed by this. America is in for a long fight. Any notion of America being invincible, that's gone today.
We do want to look back at how this day began and what happened. I think all right, we're going to get to that in just a moment. But, Gordon, you were down there. You were actually at the Pentagon with Dave Statter earlier today. Right. What was the scene like there for the people and for you?
Well, first of all, as I described it earlier, it was as if you took one of those metal wedges that you use to split wood. In other words, you put it on the log and you hit it with a sledgehammer to split the log. It's as if one of those wedges, a huge one, went right into that fifth floor E-wing, you know, facing west of the Pentagon, and just split it open. And then the floors collapsed on the other. One on the other. They did at the Murrah building in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Of course, there were. Now we have pictures of here are CNN pictures of what's happening tonight in Afghanistan. This is from Kabul. Can we get an audio on this?
Apparently.
Well, okay.
There's
just reports of explosions in Afghanistan. Now, as you know, as I said earlier, the Taliban, the spiritual leader of the Taliban, was denying that Osama bin Laden had anything to do with what happened today.
Very quiet at this
we now have audio.
moment. The city still tracer fire. Rockets going up around the airport, tracer fire flying across the city in the direction of the airport. The city at this stage still very well illuminated. The electricity supply is still on in the city, illuminating the city. Detonation coming in from towards the airport. Multiple detonations now going off again towards the perimeter of the city in the direction of the airport. We see one fire on the horizon at this moment. Kabul is surrounded by mountains. The detonations reverberate from those mountains, so it's difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly where the impacts are happening. Certainly, certainly it would appear that the Afghan defense systems have detected a threat in the air. They are launching what appears to be anti-aircraft defense systems at the moment. Certainly I can see that fire that was blazing on the horizon. It was a faint yellow. It's now a bright orange blazing. Several other detonations going off around the city, multiple areas. Rockets appear to be taking off from one end of the airport. I can see that's perhaps located about 8 or 9 miles away from where we stand, Joey.
To ask you to please keep your line up to us. We're having difficulty reaching you on another line, but please keep your line up. We can see the pictures coming to us by the video phone. Again, this is very advanced technology that CNN is using, but you will see some of the digital effect. It is not quite as clear as your average television signal, and so to our viewers, we apologize for that. But this is certainly the only video that you're going to get from Kabul, Afghanistan at this point, and you're watching it on CNN. Again, we are hearing from our correspondent, Nick Robertson, who's on the scene in Kabul with his team there, and he has reported the sounds of tracer fire. He has reported the fire burning there in Kabul, the seat of Afghanistan's power and the seat of its Taliban government. Again, we are watching their picture coming to us on the video phone, and it is very hard, of course, to see exactly what you're looking at, but you are looking at Kabul. Again, you see some tracer fire there coming across the scene. Nick Robertson, can you hear us?
We're being told, Joey, I can hear you if you can hear me. Certainly, big detonation there, missiles flying across the city. We're being told from sources in Kandahar, that's the spiritual capital of Afghanistan, 300 miles south of here, that there is no rocket activity like this south of here in Kandahar. Certainly in Kabul, very, very active at this stage. Multiple detonations. It is nighttime here. It is dark. It is difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly what we're seeing and exactly what we're hearing. Certainly the sound, what appears to be the sound of large missiles incoming and landing in the city. Certainly a big fire on the horizon of the city at the moment. And certainly anti-aircraft fire coming up from the city and rockets being launched and flying across the horizon of the city. Rockets perhaps going at the speed of several hundred miles an hour, the sort of speed that one might expect to see cruise missiles traveling across the horizon at, burning with a white glow coming from their tails rather than a yellow glow. The fire on the horizon that we can see from here burning furiously now. Perhaps it would be accurate at this stage to suspect that that was a fuel dump that's been hit by the way that it's burning, flames leaping, and that fuel dump must be perhaps 5 to 8 miles from where I am. Flames leaping up from that fuel dump now leaping up right into the air. It was a low-burning fire before, but it's now really increased in its ferocity, perhaps indicating that it is a fuel dump. Looking across the rest of the city, that fuel dump, perhaps the only big fire we can see at this time. From our vantage point here at the Kabul Intercontinental Hotel that overlooks the whole of the city of Kabul, that is in a basin surrounded by mountains, the whole city is laid out in front of us. The gunfire that was coming up from the city seems to have subsided for now. We're not hearing any more detonations at this moment. And as I say, the fire on the horizon really burning furiously at this time, flames leaping way up in the air this moment. Joey?
Nick, if you can talk to us a little bit about your circumstance. It is 6 o'clock in the evening here in Atlanta. It must be quite late at night there in Kabul.
Indeed, 2:30 in the morning here, Joey. We're eight and a half hours ahead of East Coast time in the United States. And it was about 5 hours ago that the Foreign Minister of Afghanistan, Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil, briefed journalists. I hear more detonations going off now. He said that the Taliban had not taken precautions against the possibility of there being an air attack against Afghanistan. He said because it was not necessary. The Taliban spiritual leader, Mullah Omar, had also made a statement saying that they felt...
Well, you're listening to and watching live pictures from CNN. Correspondent Nick Robertson in Kabul, where he says he's watching anti-aircraft fire, rockets being launched, gunfire, he says, has subsided there. We don't know if it's in retaliation to what happened today in the U.S.
We don't. We do know, and Robertson reported earlier, I believe it was Robertson, reported earlier on CNN, that the spiritual leader of the Taliban, and by the way, the spiritual capital of Kandahar has not been hit, apparently, according to CNN, by any kind of rocket fire. The spiritual leader, Mullah Omar, had said that Osama bin Laden could not have been responsible for this complex act of terrorism, said Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with it. That may or may not be significant, but something has happened over there. We don't know if it is any kind of response from the United States, but we know
there is
that
something going on. Kabul is surrounded by mountains, and Nick Robertson said he was watching the rockets being launched, anti-aircraft fire. He says, I'm watching a big fire from the hotel, gunfire earlier, but that subsided.
We can tell you what we do know. We do know this started this morning here in the United States when a well-coordinated terrorist attack first struck the seat of America's financial power in New York City. 2 hijacked commercial jetliners deliberately crashed into New York's World Trade Center towers, apparently. Number of victims unknown. Both 1,400 feet towers crumbled. A neighboring, smaller trade center building, Building 7, 47 stories high, that collapsed.
Now, about 40 minutes after the explosions in New York, the nerve center of the nation's military became the target of a 3rd hijacked plane. Dave Statter is at the Pentagon. Dave?
Well, it was 9:38 this morning when American Airlines Flight 77 out of Dulles went way off course, forced by hijackers to crash into the Pentagon. And we can show you the result of that as our photographer who's been here all day, Mike Trammell, zooms into the gaping hole in the center of the Pentagon here on the west side, the E-ring, on the Washington Boulevard side near the heliport. This is where the plane crashed, and this is what it looks like as we go to videotape this morning, what it looked like just after the crash as the fireball erupted, as the jet fuel started burning, and fire and rescue crews arrived, and Pentagon personnel came running out of the Pentagon trying to help those who were injured. We saw a couple of people who were severely burned being treated as we arrived here just minutes after the crash. Apparently part of the airplane there burning on the ground just outside the Pentagon. The fire took a while to get under control on the outside of the building where the plane crashed. And then about 35 minutes after the fire started, the crash occurred, there was a collapse. Let's go to that videotape. The collapse of that center portion of the Pentagon there. It came tumbling down, a smaller version of what happened in New York earlier. Apparently no firefighters in the way of that rubble as it came down. They were far enough away from what we are told that they may not have been trapped there. But people trapped inside the Pentagon at the time of the crash. These are people, a couple men we saw who were severely burned, medevaced out of here, taken to area hospitals, about 30 people taken to Arlington Hospital. We do not know, the big question today is how many people died here today. The Pentagon is unable to give us numbers of people who were in the building at the time. Part of the area is building that has been reconstructed. Another part of the area is the older part of the Pentagon. On the ground at the time of the plane crash were two firefighters who were there for Fort Myer Fire Department. And we're listening to their story told by Harold Schaitberger, who's the general president of the International Association of Firefighters. Tell me the story of the firefighters who were here.
Well, just to the left of where the aircraft made impact on the building, we have a heliport fire station. Two firefighters outside of that station had just been put on high alert because of the reports of the Twin Towers. On an open mic to their dispatch, they called in and basically said they saw an airliner coming at the building and, in fact, watch it hit the building. There was an open mic, so I assume we will hear that at some point in time. They're in the hospital right now with injury and burns.
I recognized that the plane was coming in low, and I started watching it. Of course, I was listening to the radio, and I just heard the president's address about the attack in New York, and I thought it looked funny, but I didn't put two and two together, and then it sheared off the top of that pole over there, slammed into another pole, went right into the building. It was a massive explosion and absolute chaos afterwards. One of the ladies who was in front of me said, turn around, they've hit the Pentagon, we got to get out of here. And you could hear people screaming, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It was unbelievable.
Urban search and rescue teams from Montgomery County and Fairfax County who have been placed into service around the world for earthquakes and terrorist attacks to help in the search and rescue are here on the scene. Their dogs are on the scene here to help sniff out bodies, to find anybody also who possibly could be alive, but the firefighters are very doubtful about that because of the amount of fire that was here and the amount of smoke if anybody was trapped in that rubble, and there were people trapped in that rubble. We do not have a number of people. We can't tell you how many people are dead here. But the Pentagon has confirmed there are dead who were inside the building, plus the people in the plane. Here's the roof of the Pentagon that continues to burn here. What are we talking about? 9 hours about after this fire started. It continues to burn because it's a very difficult building to fight a fire in. There have been a number of fires in the past in the Pentagon. What happens is the fire travels through the pipe chases underneath the ceilings and the walls and has spread a great distance from where this fire started. Firefighters are here from Montgomery County and as far away as Loudoun County. We saw a Sterling fire engine show up, and firefighters continue to arrive to relieve the firefighters already on the scene. Of course, the first firefighters on the scene were from the Fort Myer Fire Department in Arlington County, doing their best to tend to the injured, but there doesn't seem to be a lot that can be done for those who were trapped inside when this plane crashed into it around 9:45 this morning. Gordon and Gravere.
Dave, for the record, the city of Kabul, Afghanistan, the seat of the Taliban government, which has been protecting terrorist Osama bin Laden, appears to be under some kind of attack tonight. There are explosions emanating from there. Taliban rulers had rejected earlier suggestions that bin Laden was responsible for the attacks on the Pentagon and the ones in New York. Many of the injured from the Pentagon have been taken to the Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington.
Our Jennifer Ryan is there now with the latest. Jennifer.
Gravere and Gordon, one of the biggest obstacles today was just logistics, trying to get people, the wounded, from one area of the Pentagon here. For those who got here on their own, many of them walked in if they were able to, but just getting here seemed to be the biggest problem today. Surgeons, residents, and nurses stood on their mark, ready for the next casualty from the Pentagon. At first, there was a steady stream of victims who made their 5-mile emergency transport to the Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington in ambulances, in police cars, and in the backs of co-workers' cars. 33 in all, some laying 3 deep in the back of somebody's van. It's a small number, though, compared to the destruction and the loss of life anticipated from this disastrous terrorist attack on the Pentagon.
We've seen a variety of injuries. I guess a lot of those we've seen are typically associated with a blast-type injuries. We've seen a lot of smoke inhalation injuries, and those people have been some of the sickest folks here. We've also seen some fractures of the extremities, also burns to the face and hand.
Dr. John Service says the disaster plan has been executed smoothly. In fact, Arlington Hospital had more staff ready to respond than patients who were able to make it here. Traffic has plagued many paramedic crews who battled gridlock all day and then needed to restock dwindling supplies of bandages, oxygen, and IVs. We just had our first opportunity to talk with 2 people who were treated and released, both of them Arlington County firefighters. Derek Spector sprained his ankle, and Greg Gullick suffered dehydration. They described what they encountered when they got to the scene today.
Like a war zone. Absolutely. I've been on this department for 12 years and never ever seen something like that before.
What exactly did you see?
Describe it. Basically, when we got there, there was just a large amount of fire. We came down Washington Boulevard and just looked over and just fire everywhere. And then people coming out of the building, some being carried, some on their own. And we just went to work, do what we're trained to do in our job.
Tough to know what to do in a situation like this, of course. Both of those men are able to go home tonight. We're not sure what their next task will be, but we want to tell you about the people who are here. Again, the number is now 36. 13 of those have been admitted. 8 of them are intensive care. We're told that 4 of them are on ventilators tonight, just clinging to life. That's the very latest from Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington. Back to you at Broadcast House.
But Jen, you haven't had an admission yet. In fact, you haven't had anybody at the hospital for quite some time now, have you?
No, we saw the fire.